So good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for this event this morning on fostering inclusive cooperation on circular economy, trade and sustainable development, prospects and sectoral insights. My name is Carolyn Birkbeck, and I'm the Executive Director of the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs, TESS, based here at Geneva Graduate Institute. So welcome firstly to the Institute. But really, I think the exciting thing about today's discussion is that we really all-star cast of experts who have really, and organizations that have really led the way on discussions of circular economy, trade, and sustainable development. So I'm really excited by that. We have also some people joining us online, and a reminder that this event will also be recorded and live cast. So we have a wider audience for this discussion as well. I'm just going to say a very few brief remarks. Firstly is to thank all of our co-organizers of this event today. So we're really delighted to be working with UN Trade and Development, with the World Economic Forum, the Circular Innovation Lab, and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in pulling together this event today. And for TESS, it comes on the back of a wider collaboration we have with these organizations and a broader group, which we co-convened together an expert group over the past sort of year and a half that produced a report on trade, circular economy and sustainable development, which aimed to provide guidance on approaches and good practices for the design of trade-related circular economy policies and measures. And I'm just going to do advertising for that report, but it's really was something of I think, a landmark report in pulling together such a broad range of expertise and really trying to provide guidance on how we can make sure that trade policies generate the transformation that's needed to have more circular value chains and circular economy, but also to do so in a way that delivers on wider sustainable development goals and considers some of the social, economic and trade dimensions of this effort to promote a circular economy. So really delighted to be here today with all of you. I would like, just before we also proceed, to acknowledge my colleagues from Geneva Trade platform who have been doing a stellar job organizing these events for us this week, and also my colleague Christoph Bellman, who's really our lead at TESS on circular economy, or on a range of different issues, but particularly on circular economy. And so he will be providing closing remarks at the end. So with no further ado, I would love to hand over the moderation to Arpit Bhutani, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Circular Innovation Lab and one of the organizations that we've really been delighted to work with here at TESS. So over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to the Graduate Institute and to you at TESS and Christoph for hosting us today. Welcome, everyone, and happy to have a full room. We have two sessions today. Session one is called Circular Economy in a Fragmented World, and session two on trade cooperation in key sectors. We have a total of 90 minutes. We'll try to wrap up each session in 35 minutes and leave remaining time for question and answer or comments. Feel free to do so. The first session, Circular Economy in a Fragmented World, we will be talking about in the current geopolitics and the rise of multipolar world, what are the current challenges that we have in the global transition to a circular economy. And we have experts from wide variety of organizations. I'll start with, we'll have Shunta, Mr. Shunta Yamaguchi joining us from OECD. He's a policy analyst of the Environment and Economic Integration Division of OECD Environment Directorate, working on trade and environment issue. We have Mr. Jocelyn Blériot. He's the executive lead for policy and institutions at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and represents the foundation at the European Commission as well as at the UN. We have Ms. Elisa Tonda. She's the Chief of Resources and Markets branch of United Nations Environment Programme, Industry and Economy Division. And we have Mr. Aik Hoe Lim, who's the Director of the Trade and Environment Division at the WTO and oversees the work on trade and environment. And thank you to the panelists. We'll first start our question with Shunta, who's joined us online. Shunta, we'd love to know from your work at OECD, what are the key challenges for harmonization of circular economy framework that we have across countries?
Yes, thank you very much, Arpit, for posing this question. And first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for the very kind introduction. Apologies for not being able to join with you today. I see a lot of distinguished colleagues around the table. So to start off, I think the main challenge for circular economy and trade is that circular economy related approaches in many cases are perceived to be something domestic, like a domestic initiative such as recycling or waste management, reuse and repair. But in many times, trade has important linkages with the circular economy in three main ways, such as through global supply chains, end-of-life value chains, such as trade in secondary raw materials, second-hand goods, and waste and scrap. And the third channel is through trade and services, as the circular economy has high service sector involvement. And trade can help achieve economies of scale for materials to be better used. So trade impediments to the private sector to pursue circular economy business models across borders need to be addressed. But at the same time, trade leading to any negative environmental consequences need to be avoided. And how to strike the right balance is really at the heart of this issue. And one of the main challenges is that circular economy requirements are emerging in various countries, in various jurisdictions without much coordination. And through our work at the OECD, we found that, for example, between 2009 and 2021, 520 circular economy related measures were notified by WTO members. And among those, 271 measures were related to some sort of upstream circular economy related requirements, such as eco-design, labeling requirements around recyclability, material content, product lifespan aspects, such as recyclability, repairability, and durability. And furthermore, between 2000 and 2023, 28 specific trade concerns were raised by WTO members to clarify the details of these different circular economy related requirements. And the regulatory fragmentation of different regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures, if they're not coordinated well, can add trade costs for producers and exporters to adjust to different market requirements, such as on test methods, calculation methods, or criteria required for durability, repairability, and recyclability, etc. So the international dimension of the circular economy related initiatives need to be taken into consideration at early stages of policy design so that businesses and trade can support the circular economy transition. And there can be several possibilities to address this, such as through the multilateral level, regional level, and the national level, such as at the multilateral level, ensuring WTO principles, as well as principles of adopting international standards or developing international standards. The regional level, there could be regulatory cooperation provisions and regional trade agreements, as well as some international regulatory cooperation in this field. And at the national level, there can be approaches such as applying good regulatory practices, such as applying regulatory impact assessments. So there are also several tools available, but it's really important to bring these different strands together so that we have more coherence. So I'll stop here and really looking forward to the discussions today. But back to you, Arpit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shunta, and thank you for really illustrating and explaining to us that how we need to look at trade as a tool for the circular economy transition, but at the same time understand why circular economy transition is not happening because of not the right way we are trading, and also we don't have the right frameworks that are there. Moving to Joss. Joss, tell us how can advocacy and systemic approaches drive the transition from linear trade models to circular economy?
Thanks very much, Arpit, and thank you all for the kind invitation. It's been a pleasure to collaborate with TESS over the past few years, and we're really committed to pushing this forward. Interesting keywords. I would say that advocacy for us is about setting a clear direction and creating the conditions for an effective business and policy dialogue, because there has been quite a lot of advocacy made on behalf of the circular economy as a framework, It's been accepted. Chatham House and UNIDO have shown that over 75 national roadmaps had been created. By our estimation, about 55% of global businesses have some form of circular economy strategy in their plans. And now we need to move to the implementation phase. The question around the systemic nature of it, well, it's simply because circular economy is a whole of the economy agenda. It's not a mere technicality, it's not a waste management issue. But the current system, the linear system, is hardwired for and by extraction and production and waste. Material choices, energy choices are in a way shaped by that system, and the IMF was saying recently that the fossil fuel subsidies in 2022 amounted to around 7% of GDP. The global material flows are the product of that system to a certain extent, and circular economy is a question of feedstocks, of business models, and of processes as well. It's about the stuff that we allow on the market and in terms of nature and in terms of volume as well. That requires transparency and traceability in the way that we deal with those materials. And it's true for technical materials as well as soft commodities and food products. How do we ensure that production methods are conducive to circular economy and to regeneration? To a certain extent, the fisheries subsidies agreement passed by the WTO recently and entered in force yesterday is a very good example of that having an impact on the way that we source and the way that we avoid overexploitation by shaping the conditions of that market. So it is crucial to map the trade impacts of national or regional circular economy policies, and I think that Shunta explained this very well. Things like design and product regulations, for instance, or extended producer responsibility rules. But we also need to look at the systemic levers that include procurement, information systems, like product passport, for instance, and the harmonization between national efforts on circular economy and their impacts on trade actually remains an emerging topic to a certain extent and needs to be explored better if we're going to have harmonization and make sure that we talk the same language by what we mean in terms of circular economy and how that affects the global transnational material flows that we want to see in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Joss. And I think the root of all of this is that we need to work towards systemic levers for this transition to change the system that we're operating in, which is absolutely linear. We're trying to have a circular world in a linear economic system. Moving to Elisa, Madam, please tell us to what extent on circular economy principles can be translated to trade strategies that create incentives to investment and innovation.
Thank you very much, Arpit, and good morning to everybody. Really a pleasure being here in the conversation. And congratulations on the report, Caroline, that you were showing to all of us. Let me start restating one of the points, Arpit, that you asked in the question, because at least in my perspective, this is central to understand, to enter into the details of the relationship between circular economy and trade. We want a concept of circular economy, which helps us make the case that this is providing business opportunity. This is helping economic growth. This is good for employment. That this creates opportunities of innovation. This is creating opportunity for investment. So this is where we want to, the vision of what we want to achieve. And therefore, I think that what we want to honestly put on the table for ourselves is how can we create the evidence, the path that lead us to demonstrate the strong linkages across those concepts. And in my view, trade will have to be another important ingredient to demonstrate those connections and linking the environmental policies that have been in many countries the beacon for circular economy conversations with industrial policies, with economic development policies, with labor policies, with trade policies, and make sure that they are aligned, they are pushing us all in the same direction on the different sector. That will be the ingredient for our success. But what I want to put on the table for our conversation is that in doing so, in the context in which we are operating and with the challenges that we're seeing globally, it actually requires us to be mindful of some of the implications that the transition towards this vision will have. And one that we are hearing very frequently is how the circular economy is very closely aligned with the equity and the inclusivity that we want to see into that transition. We have been exposed to conversations around building circularity in specific value chain, and we will be hearing later on plastics, on textiles, and we know that the construction of those value chains are also very much relying on informal workers, and we have seen very active conversation with the waste speakers community that make for an important reinsertion of resources into the economy. How can we make sure that the transition and the vision that we are putting on the table is not forgetting any of those actors, any of those stakeholders? Along a similar vein, how can we make sure that that vision of a circular economy is a vision that takes us to what some of my colleagues refer to as a safe circular economy? So we know that in the products that we want to circle into the economy, there will likely be chemical substances. How can we make sure that in creating the circularity in the economy, we are actually very mindful that we are protecting health of people, health of workers exposed to those products, health of citizens that are using those products? Let me put on the table a third element for our conversation, which is one of, again, being mindful in our consideration and in using some of the elements that are really very instrumental for trade considerations, that we are not running the risk of generating unintended consequences or consequences perceived as such. How can we make sure that when we are seeing the flow of resources into the economy, we are not through, for example, secondary materials market, we are not infringing on the visions that industrial policies have for countries? Or how are we making sure that requirements of products that are there associated with what Jocelyn was referring to as design requirements are not actually limiting the opportunities of countries in achieving their development's objectives? And last but not least, how are we going to play in a context of the interlinkages between circular economy and trade? How are we going to play the interface between harmonizing, providing guidance, but also creating room for flexibility as different countries are starting from different standpoints their journey towards circularity? So I'm putting those points of reflections around alignment on the table, not as an obstacle. Those of you who know me know I've been a very long time advocate for the transition to circularity, but for us to be able to have the right responses and the right evidence that show the alignment of objective, particularly now when we're going to also have to tackle the scarcity of resources, not only material resources, but financial resources as well. Arpit, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you, madam, and thank you for giving us three major points of reflection, looking at how trade has to be looked at in multi-directional ways, looking at, and I would say whatever all you have said can be linked to just transition, and it should be a transition that should be incompatible for everyone and everything and all the policies that we have, and it's easier said than done, but we are on the right path, I believe. Thank you, madam, and I'll move to Mr. Aik Hoe Lim now. First of all, congratulations on the fisheries agreement that has started, been ratified. So congratulations on that. So your first question is, so in terms of circular economy, how are the WTO members working to foster inclusive cooperation, particularly to ensure it's a just transition and the global south is not left behind? Please guide us a bit on that.
Well, thank you very much. A pleasure to be here and great to share the panel with all the speakers here today. On the congratulations, I must say that a lot of it has to go to the members. I mean, it's the WTO members who made it possible, and also to you, because there was a huge community of NGOs, civil society, stakeholders, all pushing for fishery subsidies agreements. So we're very pleased that that happened. So thank you very much for that. You know, a lot's already been said about the circular economy, what needs to be done, and the transition that's required, or the just transition that you mentioned, as well as the implementation. So my remarks to start off with are really going to be very WTO specific. I thought it'd be helpful to maybe share a little bit on the type of discussions that have been taking place at the WTO. I mean, Shunta already made this point, which was that, and I think that seems very, very basic today, but 5-6 years ago, it wasn't that basic. This question as to whether WTO or the trade community or the WTO members should actually discuss circular economy or not. As Shunta said, a lot of the discussion was very much about domestic economy and keeping it local. So the notion of having a trade discussion in circular economy seemed a little bit at odds with what the vision was at that time, at least for some of us here in Geneva. May not be the case for Jocelyn, who's far more insightful than I am, but it was certainly the case. And anyway, that conversation actually advanced, and WTO members did get to grips. They're still trying to get to grips with the circular economy and trade. But the very basic point is that since most of the world's goods are traded, you're not going to be able to change production and consumption patterns very easily unless you consider international trade. And so that's a very sort of almost a very basic statement. And so the next question is, what of international trade should one be considering? And a lot of it is about mechanics, really, if I can put it that way. It's about understanding the machinery. We have a reasonable understanding of international trade based on the linear economy, but we did not have a very good understanding, and we still don't, I must admit. It's improving, but we don't have necessarily the best understanding of the circular economy as far as it relates to cross-border trade, and how does it happen? What is the value chain? How is it different from the linear economy and so forth? So in short, WTO members through the Committee on Trade and Environment and through a very specific working group on trade and circular economy under the structured discussions on trade and environment have been trying to map out and to try to understand at a very, let's say, fairly granular level, what are we talking about when we talk about transforming textiles trade, for instance, or transforming plastics trade, or electronics trade, and you can break it down to different electronic sectors. And it's really a mapping, essentially, between the established range of WTO agreements the complexity of value chains in the various sectors, and trying to understand, as was the point was made, the very fragmented regulatory space that we're operating in, and new standards coming on stream all the time, and to have that better understanding. And it's not just us, of course. Shunta and the OECD and other organizations have been doing tremendous work, UNCTAD as well, to understand the trade and circular economy value chain, let's put it for short. Okay. And that group of members in the WTO, it's the TESSD that is sponsored by 78 members, coordinated and by Costa Rica and Canada, has been looking at this, and has been looking at it focusing on 4 sectors: textiles, renewable energy, batteries, and electronics. The ongoing work, as I said, is very much about mapping their understanding of these different aspects of that interrelationship between trade and the circular economy, based upon a lot of sharing of experiences between members themselves. They have been sharing their regulations, their measures, and their plans for what they intend to do with the circular economy. And they've basically been focused, or let's say highlighting, number one, again, it's fairly basic, but I think it's really important: transparency. Simply understanding, when we say fragmented regulatory space, it's still quite high level. One has to get a bit deeper into what is the fragmentation we're seeing. Is it fragmented on regional level? Is it fragmented at a sort of, let's say, between developed and developing? Is it nationally fragmented? And are we expecting further fragmentation? And what is the point of this fragmentation? Shunta mentioned a few notifications to the WTO, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more that is not notified to WTO. And how do we improve the transparency? That's something the members are seized upon. We know that a lot of this on the circular economy involves standards and regulations. There's an existing WTO agreement, the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, and that relationship between the TBT agreement and circular economy has been an aspect of discussion and consideration. And I'll finish in just 2 last points, is that when we look at standards and regulations, it's really around the different trade policies that relate to the product's life cycle. And it includes labeling schemes, extended producer regimes, it includes environmental regulations, and you can look at environmental regulations from the beginning right to the end in terms of waste and recycling. So that's that whole cluster of issues. And lastly, what the groups and the discussions have really highlighted, and I think that point was made in the question to me on just transition, strong need for capacity building, for technical assistance, access to technologies, and the role of international cooperation. And here's a bit of a question: are there traditional mechanisms, trade mechanisms, for all of these things that could do more to support the circular economy? And if yes, what should they be doing more of? What is the type of technical assistance one should be thinking about? So that's a range of issues I've really thrown forward. And my last comment is that I think we want to avoid the mistakes, perhaps, experience, I think is a better way of putting it, of previous transitions. Developing countries do have a stake in the circular economy. They have a strong potential comparative or existing advantage, or sometimes we call it green comparative advantage. And they also want to increase their share of the value chain, moving towards greater value added. So transitioning towards a circular economy is also an opportunity to assist developing countries to transition to higher value added in the circular economy itself. So I think that, if possible, will create a stronger incentive to embrace circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Aik, and thank you for summing up really well. We should avoid the mistakes there, or like you said, we should learn from these experiences that we have had in the previous transitions, and also how trade is such an important and pivotal concept when it comes to this transition. And we saw that at the INC 5.2 also, So thank you so much for also explaining about different types of fragmentation we have, and not just the international fragmentation. We'll be having one question each for the panelists now, but we don't have a lot of time, so it'll be just 2 minutes each. Starting with Shunta again. Shunta, in your point of view, what international frameworks could contribute to harmonization of circular economy practices? What solutions do you think we have for that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Arpit, for the question. And I think, this regulatory fragmentation or initiatives that are emerging domestically, and how do you align those is really the question to benefit from trade and economies of scale for the circular economy transition. And the good sign is that there are a lot of different institutions that are starting to look into this, not least, as Aik Hoe said, about the TESS-D, WTO TESS-D initiative and its dedicated working group on the circular economy. A lot of institutions around the table today, including the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, WEF, and TESS and the Circular Economy Lab, as well as us at the OECD and UNCTAD, we've been working on this nexus. And I think what's also encouraging is that there are also business initiatives that are going forward, such as the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, and their dedicated working group on the circular economy, as well as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and its initiative on the Global Circularity Protocol. And I think there are several key aspects to address, such as promoting trade in goods and services that contribute to a circular economy, scaling up cross-border reverse supply chains, such as for critical raw materials, and addressing regulatory fragmentation and the interoperability of circular economy related regulations and standards. So there's still a bit of work to go forward, but I think we have good institutional frameworks going ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shunta. Jos, over to you. Can you share some concrete examples of advocacy initiatives and systemic approaches for the transition?
Yes, sure. Well, I'll go back to the work that we started doing together with UNEP in 2018, which, if it's not a trade mechanism or trade facilitation initiative per se, the work that we've done on the global commitments for a new economy for plastics provided the alignment and the technical definitions, the sourcing questions, the end-of-life treatment, the reduction of virgin plastics production goals that both companies and countries committed to, actually, thereby creating the conditions for a dialogue which is based on the same language and the same objectives. And that, of course, because we're talking about member states and multinational companies, will have an impact on trade and really creates that baseline of understanding. So I would definitely put this as under the banner of, let's say, inspiration for better trade in circular economy. That's obviously an initiative that we want to pursue. We are working at the moment on a new version of the global commitment. So watch this space, I would say. The second one, of course, and Ho alluded to it, is this TESS-D structured discussion on circular economy specifically, which again is a cross-national, multi-member state dialogue on circular economy and what it means, depending on the type of value chain that the countries have, what they want to export, what they want to make sure that they exploit in a regenerative fashion when it comes to soft commodities, making sure that the revenue generation that countries derive from their specific value chains, and some of them in emerging countries are most based on natural resources and food, is also in a way able to remain circular, and we don't end up exploiting those feedstocks in a completely linear fashion, while keeping the circular economy focused only on technical materials and waste management. We're actually working together with UNCTAD on the paper on these circular economy and bioeconomy policies alignment. So again, Stay in tune for this one. We'll probably be presenting this at UNEP 7, hopefully in December in Nairobi. And finally, the third example that I would put on the table is more technical and more sectoral. It's the work that has been carried out by the UNEP on traceability for garments and footwear with the International Trade Center and support from the European Commission, with blockchain pilots for companies to use. So traceability throughout the value chain when it comes to sourcing raw materials all the way to end-of-use products, which is a very concrete, practical application of what circular economy can look like for a whole sector.
Thank you. Thank you, Jos, for giving an overview on the different activities that are happening, and we'll stay tuned. Over to you, Madam. Given the unique challenges different countries face in implementing a circular economy, what are the potential barriers to integrating these principles?
So I'm not going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to dive into the details of the barriers, but I'm going to echo one of the points that Jos was mentioning in terms of how to create the responses to those barriers. Because my reading is that the transition towards circularity is actually something that we are building as we speak. And I don't sense anyone has the magic set of ingredients that is going to make it work as of now, but we are testing and learning as we go for a lot of these ingredients. So where I see the opportunities of discussing and learning from one another on the challenges that different countries are facing are really the spaces for dialogues, and some are spaces where we are actually joining hands with some of the partners here in the room, such as the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, where our partners in UNIDO, but also EMF as strategic partners are coming in to help countries with specific questions that they have, and the regional initiatives such as the Latin American and Caribbean Coalition on Circular Economy and the African Alliance on Circular Economy are very much spaces where those questions are being debated, both from a global perspective, but also going into the details of the specificities that exist in different regions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam. And we'll now move to Aik. Aik, as WTO members explore how trade rules and circular economy regulations can complement each other, which steps and actions are often mentioned, and what are the next steps?
I think I may already have answered that question in the first response, but basically, if you're looking at the working group on trade and circular economy, their next steps is basically complete the mapping on textiles, on renewable energy, batteries and electronics, with a view to presenting something at MC13, which is next year, 2026, in Cameroon. So that's the game plan, at least for that particular group. And I think beyond that, there are, of course, other discussions going on in WTO that may not, on the face of it, use the label, let's call it circular economy, but would have an implication in the circular economy. And these are more sort of the usual trade discussions, because, for instance, I think one of the speakers mentioned subsidies. How one subsidizes or not subsidized will have an impact on the circular economy. So discussions on distortive subsidies is an important consideration. Some of it may be trade aspects related. There could be discussions on trade facilitation at the WTO, which is a horizontal discussion, which is not circular economy, but would have also implications and impact. This year's public forum, and I'll finish on this, it opens a completely new window on digital trade and AI. Everyone likes to say solution is in AI, but not being facetious. But I do think there are important AI aspects to be thinking about the circular economy. Whether that's a WTO job or not, I don't know. But certainly, I think these are interesting new issues. Thank you.
Definitely interesting times for all of us. We have 2 minutes for comments and reflections. So I'll be really happy to take if you have any. Madam, please introduce yourself and.
I live mine of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. When there's circularization, people come up with the idea of extracting rent instead of selling consumables. So we have a problem that, as you already said, circularity is not 100%. There are some side effects happening, and therefore we need a limit to the speed of circular movement, you know, and this also means that, you know, how many times should people, you know, be allowed to extract rent on the same thing? This needs to be discussed too. The impact of the infrastructure and structures needed, including traceability structures, on the environment and the human functions needs to be taken into consideration. And the KPI, I think, should include all the side effects and all of the above, versus the usefulness of circularity. We need to take things into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for your comment, and it's well noted. Any more questions you have also?
Yes, it's not, sorry, Ron Steenblick from the Quaker United Nations office. It's not really so much a question, but just a couple of observations. One is that I find it a little bit disconcerting when the topic of a circular economy comes up, particularly in relation to plastic. I mean, when we're talking about metals, there more or less is a true circular economy. Talking about plastic, though, it's not really a circular economy. It's more of a vortex economy. As we all know, the rate of recycling, for example, plastics is extremely low, and to a large extent, it's basically downcycling. A second, and that Monsieur Blériot, sorry if I mispronounced the name, had cited a figure for subsidies to fossil fuels. I'm sorry, it's not 7% of GDP. This is the IMF number. It's not the official number that's endorsed by countries. 80% of that number is an estimate of consumption-related externalities, and one part of that is driving, and not even of combustion. If one decides that externalities are subsidies, and you added up all the externalities from water pollution, air pollution, soil pollution, noise pollution, odor pollution, habitat destruction, you could probably be looking at 50%, maybe even 100% of measured GDP. It's a ridiculous number. So just, you know, I'm happy to talk about this personally afterwards, but please, it doesn't help to use these kinds of numbers in the discussion. If you want to know what the actual subsidies are to plastics, we, Kuno, together with Eunomia Research Consulting, have recently estimated global subsidies to plastics at around, that's just primary plastic production, at around $80 billion a year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And definitely we cannot recycle our way out of plastics. There are other interventions that we need to do. If you have a small reflection, we can take it. Yes, please.
Yes, it's Christopher Ernst from ILO. I just wanted to compliment also that what we are doing on this, especially when you talk about just transition and inclusivity. So maybe you are not aware, that's why I wanted to put it on the table. So we just recently did a couple of studies on this, for example, on circular economy, trade and employment, and the employment dimension of this. We also have a general study on circular economy employment to understand this, and also on specifically on e-waste and employment, where we also have a subchapter on trade, just to give some information. For example, CE exports support 5.96 million jobs worldwide, of which 27% are direct and 73% are indirect. We looked at male, female workers, youth, skilled workers, etc. And I have two of this, the summary briefs on the table, and you can look it up later on. But we also have some concrete works in the TC cooperation, especially in Africa, where we look at it and to understand a little bit better, especially because we see that this is an opportunity for informal workers, wage pickers and others, to get a better job, to get better income, to get into formal jobs. Sometimes it's not a sum up zero. It's not that circularity may create more jobs because you also lose jobs. But I think it's a way to go, and we have to understand what is the employment dimension, how to improve inclusivity. And we also look at technology, which technology is the best to promote this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And we have read your report on circular jobs, and thank you for releasing that. So this was an exciting discussion. Thank you. We'll have to now move to session 2, where we'll be looking at sectors, key sectors where we need trade cooperation. And we are joined by an amazing panel, starting with Dr. Henrique Pacini. He's an economist at the Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development branch at the UN Trade and Development. We have Dr. Jack Barrie, formerly worked at the Chatham House and today representing the World Economic Forum. He holds a PhD on circular economy innovation policy. We have Apurva Arya. She's the CEO of Circular Innovation Lab, an environmental economist and a coordinating lead author for Geo7's Circular Economy chapter. We have Dr. Patrick Schroeder, Senior Research Fellow at Chatham House, and international sustainability expert in circular economy sustainability, resource governance and SDGs. And he's also the coordinating lead author of Geo7 Circular Economy chapter. We again have 3 minutes per question. And we'll start with Henrique. Henrique, to what extent does the status quo on trade cooperation contribute to support the development and adoption of advanced recycling and sorting across borders?
Hi, Arpit, colleagues. Thank you for the invitation, and sorry for not being present with you. I am here in Stockholm. Those conversations I can't miss. And you put me in a question in plastics, right? The sector plastics, just after Ronald made a very interesting comment on the vortex economy. So you put me a hot seat. Trade cooperation helps to deal with plastics. Both in the dimension of goods, because any way to collect, recycle, manage, even landfill plastics require a bundle of HS codes, so a bundle of products. You have no idea how complex it is, or many of you have been to recycling sites, for example, but you need a lot of equipment, a lot of sensors, pumps, in order to recycle plastics. For example, you need to have water treatment systems, because you need to wash the plastics before. And all those things are not often available in the same jurisdiction. You often need to import them from regional or overseas markets. And the same with services, right? You need data in order to manage plastics well. You need to have professional services, like people who know how to assemble systems, because plastics management is an assembled system or a collection of systems. You need design, and you also need collection. Collection is often neglected. As we all know, collection rates are very low in most parts of the world, including the OECD. And so both trading goods and services need to be facilitated, and ideally value chains should be regionalized. I can talk more and more about this, but I'm not a believer of chemical recycling. I haven't seen it myself. I've heard about it. I've seen bottle-to-bottle recycling. But what I've seen in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Kenya, in Asia, countries where we have technical assistance projects deployed, is mechanical recycling, right? And all the things I mentioned above, those things are complex systems made of a bundle of HS codes, plus require a lot of inputs of services is valid. So anything that can facilitate those goods to be lumped together and just be more concrete. One of our grantees said it is very easy to import a water treatment plant to plug into its recycling line, but it's very hard to import parts for this water treatment plant. So it doesn't really help if you can import a whole system at a reduced, let's say, tariff rate or VAT rate. if you cannot maintain the system by buying parts to keep it running. There's a lot of technological failure in those installations. So yeah, that'll be my first point. I think having facilitation on imports of parts for those systems, and also having, for example, recognition of diplomas for engineers to be able to cross borders in East, West Africa, Pacific, to be able to practically disseminate the technology. We don't transfer it, it gets disseminated. It's very important so that people can actually deploy those systems with a lower technology failure rate. I'll stop here, Arpit. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrique, and also sharing your experience at SMEP and different grantees and what are the challenges they've faced in recycling. Moving to circular bioeconomy. Jack, governments are increasingly committing to national circular economy and bioeconomy agendas. From your perspective, can you shed some light on these developments and explain what this means for a circular bioeconomy transition?
Thanks, Arpit. Good morning, everyone. Just to state before I go into this, and so I'm answering on an individual capacity here rather than for the World Economic Forum. But you mentioned circular bioeconomy, which is, I think, far greater than a sector-specific thing. But I think it's important to break that term down because bioeconomy and circular economy tend to be used in isolation as terms. What is meant by a circular bioeconomy, for me, it's quite simple. It's combining the renewable biological resources and overlaying that with circular economy principles so that you grow regeneratively and restoratively your biomass feedstock, you design the biomaterials and bio-based products to be durable, non-toxic, which Elisa was mentioning, easily repaired, and then revalorized at the end of life, going safely back into the economy or back into nature. So it's quite simple. Bioeconomy provides the renewable feedstock, the circular economy makes the most efficient use of that feedstock. So what's interesting, if we look at the kind of global landscape, is that governments are really taking attention of these two terms. We mapped last year, there's over 60 national bioeconomy strategies now being published in different forms. And Joss, you mentioned the report we did on 75 national circular economy roadmaps. Well, I've just redone that analysis and there's now over 90. So that is growing rapidly. And on the one hand, that's really promising. It's showing ambition on these two topics, showing that governments are really picking it up. What's concerning is there's 60 bioeconomy strategies and 90 circular economy strategies done in parallel. And pointing to Joss, you mentioned the ongoing study that EMF are due to publish, which I contributed to in a small way, which looked at governments which have published both the bioeconomy strategy and a circular economy strategy, and analysed how closely they were interlinked. And not to give away the really good findings that EMF will present, but there's virtually no collaboration, coordination on these two agendas at the national level. They tend to sit in different ministries or departments. They tend to have different policy agendas and goals. And the risk that is if these two transitions continue in this way, you'll end up with two sets of policies that will contravene each other, contradict each other, and conflict with each other. Maybe to give you a practical example, talking about plastics and bioplastics that Henrique brought up, if your bioeconomy strategy incentivizes subsidies for bioplastics, and in your circular economy strategy, you haven't at all considered that might scale up domestically, that stream, that material stream, and you don't put in place closed loop reuse systems, specialized recycling systems, whatever, then you're going to have, you're potentially going to create even more harm if you're not looped in. So I think the question before trade and what role does trade play in the circular bioeconomy is, first, we need a bit more of a harmonized agenda on the bioeconomy and the circular economy and how they link together at the national and international scale. And I think there's a real need Given that I've just mentioned how many national strategies there are, there's a real need now for the international community to come together and put our thinking caps on about how practically these two topics interlink, and then how that translates into a more harmonized legislative landscape. I don't know about my time, so I can maybe pause there and come back on actual trade flows that are useful for the bioeconomy.
But thank you for telling us that we first make the policy and then we talk about harmonizing it, or sometimes not even talk about harmonizing it at all. Apurva, over to you on critical minerals. Tell us, how can countries meet growing demands of critical energy transition minerals for the green and digital transition?
Thank you, Arpit, for the question, and a very good morning to everyone present here. I'm really excited to be with such a distinguished set of panelists here today. So, of course, as we all know, the transition from fossil fuel to clean energy sources will depend on critical energy transition minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, and so on and so forth. And much of this, especially also estimated by the International Energy Agency, the consumption of these is set to increase sixfold by 2050. And a key question to then ask is that how can countries, meet these growing demands, given different priorities, mandates, agendas, one thing that we really need to think through is when we are trying to balance this demand and supply of critical energy transition minerals, is they're going to, of course, securing this will have an impact, both environmental, social, economic, especially also linked with trade as well. And how do we then sort of work coherently across different elements of, say, policy alignment as well? Like if we want to be ensuring that we have a secondary supply of these critical energy transition minerals from recovery and recycling, because circularity can play a key role here. But what that would entail is to make sure that the just transition aspect is also incorporated. How do we ensure that the informal workers who are going to be part of recovering these critical energy transition mineral, how they safeguard? Do we have different protocols to ensure that is done in a way that is not harmful to human health, for instance? Much of our work within the Circular Innovation Lab has also been working a lot with UNEP on different projects on phasing chemicals out of supply chains, and we increasingly see the impact that it could have on human health as well, and that is something that we should definitely be very mindful of. And I think in terms of the other aspect, and maybe because you mentioned the Global Environment Outlook, which is the scientific assessment of the state of the environment, is also going to be launched in UNEP 7 in Nairobi in December. And some of the work that we looked in with Patrick as well is how much of the demand of this critical energy transition minerals, around 38 to 58%, could be meant through the secondary supply. And of course, and then the key question then begins is that how do we then create a fair and transparent global trade system for these goods? And maybe I can highlight some of the recent work of the WTO and the Asian Development Bank, wherein they launched a new database on critical minerals to enhance transparency of these minerals, and a database that provides information on different trade flows, allows visualization of trade networks, and compiles the data on tariffs and other trade policies for over 250 critical minerals. There's also work being done by OECD, so their initiative on critical minerals for sustainable growth and development also promotes this resilient critical mineral supply chain. And then, of course, coming to trade, for this to work, essentially, we need to have harmonized standards and definitions and like a shared and mutual understanding of these. We also need to make sure that the HS codes that even Jack was mentioning earlier, and so was Henrique, they sort of incorporate these different aspects of circularity within these definitions as well, for us to be able to scale it. Perhaps I should stop here a bit to
right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Purva, and what a better time to talk about critical minerals than this time that we have and this panel on fragmented world and trade. We'll move to textiles. Dr. Patrick, taking into account each country faces its local context challenges and specific issues, how can countries cooperate on common standards for eco-design, recyclability, durability of textiles to facilitate fair trade without conflicting with national interest and policies? Thank you.
Okay. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, thanks for the questions, Arpit. It's an interesting question because it's both technical and actually there's a political element to that as well. In my answer, I can reflect a bit on some of the insights and experience we have from some of our projects. So we engage with UNEDO. It's in the Switch to Circular Value Chains program. It's funded by the European Commission, and there we're working with the government in Bangladesh. We also recently have conducted a number of studies with GIZ and Laudes Foundation on the impact of upcoming European textile strategy on producer countries. And in this context of new design, eco-design standards, the main policy there that we need to look at is the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, the ESPR. And that's been actually in preparation already for a number of years. And what we did initially in our exchanges and dialogues with various governments, often ministries of commerce, but then also various business associations, we try to update what's the latest state, what's happening in Europe, because we understand there's a gap of understanding the policy process in Brussels. And I think at this stage now, the governments in Bangladesh, in India, Pakistan, Ghana, other countries, they're aware that this is happening. And I think there's readiness also to cooperate with Europe on new standards for eco-design, on durability, etc. Now, I think we're now at a more critical point to understand actually what will be these new standards. And what's happened earlier this year, so the Eco-Design Forum has had its first meeting. This is like a technical expert group with experts from across Europe, most of them, I think, representing industry, but then also NGOs, other independent technical experts. And they will need to now come up with these specific standards on, let's say, fiber strength of recycled yarns, or criteria about abrasion, criteria about microplastics release of textiles. And also depending on which product categories. Are we talking about garments? Are we talking about home textiles? Are we talking about blended fabrics, synthetics, pure cotton? So there's a lot of very technical detail that needs to be clarified. But then I think that's when the political question comes in, and it's very much about the role of the EU as rule maker, and then producer countries as rule taker. I think we're now in a different situation where it doesn't work that way, or it shouldn't work that way. It should be a lot more collaborative, and actually to make this work, there needs to be, I think, more processes. And we've realized also that there aren't enough of these technical dialogues happening on time. And I think Shunta mentioned earlier on, there have already been these issues launched at the WTO about new criteria for products coming in by countries. And if this is not done in a cooperative way, I think we will see more of that in the textiles and garment sector. So yeah, so on that aspect. Then also another political aspect, I guess, that you mentioned, the national interest or priorities. That's also actually a bigger question. So what are countries' national interests? Is it really to create a sustainable circular textile value chain, or is it about profit maximization of your national industries? So that's, I think, also a bigger discussion that we need to have, because I think if it's only about maximizing profits, we're not easily moving towards a more circular system.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I know it was a sort of question with a lot of facets and not easy to answer that in such a short span, but thank you so much for giving such an excellent answer. We have less time for the second question, so if the panelists can keep just 1 minute each. Henrique, what specific actions are being taken by UN Trade and Development to promote circularity, ensuring trade becomes a part of solution to plastic pollution?
Thanks, Arpit. I'll try to be straight. So, and we are doing data. Right? Without data, you can't regulate anything, or you can't understand any market. So, data on plastic trade, including with a lot of support from Carolyn's team and TESS since 2021. Data on plastic substitutes, or non-plastic substitutes trade, including many natural materials. We are also exploring regenerative materials, because we often talk about basically the circular linearity, right? Recycling things and recovering methods. No, I mean, those who are members of the Church of the Circularity often talk about reducing and regenerating. And those things are more confusing to pinpoint a specific case. I like the case of seaweed. For example, we're looking at seaweed as a material for coating applications, can replace plastics and paper coating, for example. And where you grow seaweed, you tend to regenerate fish stocks. A good day to talk about fisheries. And also other materials such as PHAs, which is a natural component of bacteria that is fully degrades into water and CO2, and it just looks like same like plastics. So we are exploring that, giving some visibility for those options, and creating the Global Seaweed Initiative, the UN under the UN, which is being announced at the General Assembly. We also looking at things that deliver the same function as, for example, there are many ways of delivering things, right? Shelter, nutrition, water. Let's think about water. In those of you who travel, 90% of the room is traveling often, have projects. Often plastic pollution is associated with water delivery, right? Bottles, sachets, very common in Ghana, in Nigeria. And can we deliver water without the bottle? Yes, we can. Through pipes, expensive, the best solution, difficult, not reaching everywhere. There are also water filters. Like, why don't you think about trade in water filters? They can also replace parts of this bottles and sachets, delivering the same function. So we're looking at that as well, like alternative delivery systems that reduce instead of just recycle. Working on standards, as was mentioned there, biodegradation standards are essential. We cannot say trash, organic waste need to be put in a biodegradable bag without defining what biodegradable bag is. Many countries fell into this trap. You always need to couple a standard together with regulation to make it functional. And of course, direct support through the SMAP program, developing fibers from banana, which you left in the field before, banana pseudostems, developing fibers from pineapple, and developing substitutes to mulch films used in agriculture. So instead of polyethylene films, use coconut coir mats that do the same functions. They are being tested in Ghana, and they grow the pineapple just the same way as with covered in plastics. So I like those precise cases because they give a flavor of where things are. And I also provoke the room here to think about how regenerative and reduction solutions can be part of trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrique. Now we'll move to Jack and tell us how can trade specifically help.
Yeah, in 1 minute, I'll try. I think the key thing is there's a whole range of different trade flows that can facilitate businesses to undertake circular bioeconomy business models and develop products. But these trade flows face many barriers. Shunta did an excellent example covering definitions, standards, technical barriers to trade facilitation issues, capacity building. They're not represented in trade and economic agreements, whole list of challenges which the community needs to face. But maybe taking Henrique's lead on some more tangible, specific, what do we actually mean by trade flows that are beneficial? There's trading goods. So these are things like machinery, equipment, spare parts, tools for businesses to implement regenerative agricultural practices, whether that's precision seeding, whether that's aquaponics, whether that's vertical farming, whatever. You've got advanced bio-based revalorization, so reusing bio-wastes and revalorizing them back into the economy. You've got monitoring and tracking equipment. That's what Joss was touching on about traceability, being able to determine the provenance of these biomaterials, not just in where they're produced, but all the way through the whole life cycle to revalorization. You've got digital traceability hardware, sensors, whatever. And then you've got specialist equipment to produce circular biomaterials. So that's things like advanced genomics equipment, industrial biotechnologies, biorefining processes. So there's a huge amount of trade flows there that are facing barriers. And then layer on top of that the challenge of also services. So this is things like educational platforms from abroad or overseas, or experts overseas that Henrique was touching on, being able to cross borders to share that knowledge. Services is a massively underlooked area in terms of the barriers it's facing for the circular bioeconomy. And then the final one is around the trade in secondary raw materials, waste and scraps and residues of biomaterials. Billions and billions of tons are traded around the world every year. And that's moving them to centers of economic activity which have the economies of scale and the specialism, the competitive advantage to actually re-input these back into the economy. But reverse logistics of secondary biomaterials is extremely complex and extremely difficult route to navigate. And I think that's a topic that needs real attention quite quickly. I'll stop there, Arpit.
Thank you, Jack. We're moving to Apurva. Apurva, the extraction of raw materials. Sure, that raw materials extraction causes less environmental harm and contribute to sustainable development.
Thank you, Arpit. A big question for a minute as well, but I'm going to try. I think much of it was covered when we talk about, how do you have these shared and mutually recognized definitions to make sure that the secondary materials market or goods are traded and scaled in a way which is not harmful for the environment, of course. Then there's also the global framework on chemicals that was adopted in 2023. And a big part of it is how do countries work together to sort of implement some of the guidelines or the targets within these key sectors, as well as electronics as well, to make sure that element, the sustainable element, is sort of incorporated. And of course, finally, just because a lot of the work that we're doing is also part of how different suppliers within supply chains like electronics, for instance, are able to comply with much of the legislation coming from the EU. Patrick mentioned the ESPR, but also the digital product passports that are coming up with batteries and so on. So there's a massive amount of work that needs to be done on mapping different stakeholders to make sure that some of the upstream aspect of circularity within electronics is also incorporated as well. How do you make sure that different the ecosystem of the digital infrastructure supports it? So I think much of that work is also going to be really key in making sure the transition in these sectors is more equitable and gives more access, and the social element of it is also sort of taken into consideration when we're doing these massive exercises as well.
Thank you, Apurva. Moving to Patrick. In developing countries, many workers, including women and informal workers, depend on production of fast fashion for their livelihoods. How do you suggest framing global policies to ensure just transition is there and we ensure inequalities are not deepened?
Yes, also a big question for 1 minute, but I can be quick. I can just, I think, refer to the inclusive circular economy. This is Chatham House coined with the first report in 2019, and then we adopt that also for the Just Transition paper that we published afterwards. And back then we developed the like trade framework for an inclusive circular economy. So that needs to be really baked into all strategies and on national level, but then also on international level. So ILO has also done good work on this. So we just need to keep bringing this up. And it's particularly difficult nowadays because another trend that we've identified is obviously something like circular resource nationalism, where countries looking at circularity strategies, again, to become more protectionist. And that's where then also issues around working conditions and formal sector are often very much neglected. So we need to work against also these trends. And yeah, that's, I think, big uphill task as well.
Yeah, and it's a very good paper, and then the paper was followed by the Inclusive Circular Economy Roadmap initiative that Chatham House led along with a lot of other stakeholders. Now we have some time, finally, a little bit, to have some reflections of panelists with each other's comments. Do you have anything else to add on? Joss, do you want to add any? Do you have any final comments for all of us? Aik?
Well, I think that the consensus is that, as Elisa was saying, we're creating this as we speak to a certain extent, and there's a lot of nuance to be had in what we mean by circular strategies. No, we can't, again, limit that to recycling. And the question of plastics, yeah, nobody actually pretended that circular economy was a silver bullet when it comes to plastics. It's a contribution. You need to integrate the fact that reuse, refill solutions are also part of the circular economy. It's not about a question of everything that we put on the market needs to be recycled at the same level of quality. That's one part of the equation. I think that all of these things need to be discussed and looked at for their own merits. Not the same level of contribution can be made by circular economy in the plastic sector as it is in metal, as you rightly pointed out, for sure. There are, however, a lot of margin for progress that we can tap into when it comes to innovation and making sure that, first of all, we put on the market the right amount and the right nature of products to avoid compounding toxicity as well. These strategies are not one silver bullet. And when it comes to textiles, for instance, of course, reuse models, rental models, to your question as well, how many times can a company be allowed to extract rent from what I said? You can also look at it from the linear point of view. How many times should a company be able to sell units and flood the market? Because actually it's the same thing. You derive value and generate revenue from putting either one asset in use for multiple users, and in case you extract rent, or you sell 20 pieces of clothing to one specific user as well, very short-lived. Where's the limit? It's the same principle in a way.
Thank you, Joss. Aik, any final comments?
Well, no, thanks so much for all the insights. It's been fascinating. I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. I think the world is messy and the world is getting messier. And we just have to accept that. I think it's difficult for us being in think tanks or IGOs or research institutes to grasp that reality. Everything points to things becoming much, much messier and happening with great uncertainty. So I think we need to approach it in a similar way. I think somebody already said it. It's work in progress to deal with practical measures, practical steps that you can take. Waiting for governments to align, and my apologies to governments here if there are governments here, hoping for them to align and then developing rules over their alignment would be great, but the reality, it doesn't happen. It doesn't quite happen like that. So we have to work with this complex, messy situation. And so then we have to grasp on whatever tools we have that will not necessarily make it less messy, but it would at least facilitate so that the objectives can be realized. So if the objective, and it's very much, I think, the objective of the room, is to reach a transition towards a circular economy, let's look at what are certain tools that can help governments, even as they pursue non-aligned patterns. And one thing that does come up frequently in WTO discourse on trade and environment is the notion of interoperability. It's a bit of a catchphrase. I mean, it's a slogan maybe. Maybe it doesn't, but it does capture minds. People do feel that they can talk about interoperability. They may not all be saying the same thing, but at least they understand that there's a need that even if my policies and your policies are different, or if my standards and your standards are not aligned, or our strategies are not fully aligned, we need some way to intercommunicate or be interoperable with each other. This is as basic as the travel plug, the famous travel plug. We would all love to have all plugs aligned and they're all the same, but they're not. But we created a market for someone who created the interoperable travel plug. So maybe this is a challenge to those of you in the think tanks. Think about the interoperable tool, policy tool, that would make all this messiness live with each other. So I'll stop on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Aik. And when was the last time the world was not falling apart, I guess? But we have hope also. Elisa, final comments.
So I'm going to reflect on one word, which is let's be pragmatic. In the journey that we're all doing, let's share what we are learning. There's circular economy convening that would benefit from more trade specialists to jump in. And maybe there's trade convenings that are benefiting from more circular economy practitioner to come in. And this is probably the path that we can chart for ourselves to move forward.
Thank you, Elisa. Jack?
Is this on? Yeah. I think I'd echo your point. Actually, said that we and Aik Hoe's point to an extent. It's I don't see it as a messy. It's evolving in ways that we can't quite understand. And so what we need to try and do is sit in that sweet spot of facilitating WTO, other NGOs and intergovernmental agencies and governments to find the really sensible areas like standards, for example, where they can genuinely sit down and have a pragmatic, objective conversation that doesn't scale out to what is the circular economy, what is the circular bioeconomy, and you end up in the clouds. And I think there's some really, really obvious areas that's laid out in the report that Carolyn mentioned at the start that kind of lists these 10 things that already we could sit down together and discuss really objectively how to move forward without trying to change the world all at once. And so I think the recipe's in that report, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jack. Pat?
Yeah, I agree. Also on the pragmatic approach, also on the standards. And just to add on that, I think the technical cooperation part between countries will be crucial. And we already see some, it relates, I guess, also to the question around the end of development. That's been kind of like a topic also, I guess, at UNGA maybe this week. But I think development and technical cooperation on circular economy is probably an important area that I think governments are also willing to continue. So that's, I think, an area where we can also try to feed in from our different organizations and institutions that we're working with.
Thank you, Patrick. And the session ends, but I'd like to say thank you to all the panelists, also to the ones that have joined online. We'll have closing remarks from Christophe, but before that, a big round of applause for our panelists, please. Over to you, Christophe.
Well, thank you, Arpit. And I don't think there's much that I can add. Just some kind of quick reflections from my side. I was thinking just before, I think I've heard the word circular economy probably less than 10 years ago. And it's probably the same for a lot of people in this room. And it's really impressive to see how in such a short amount of time you've seen such momentum behind this concept. We've heard all these kind of new circular economy strategies coming up, all these legislation. So I think it's a very encouraging kind of development that we're seeing. We've heard that this raises a number of challenges in terms of policy alignment between environment, trade, employment, investment. Policies. I quite like the example of the bioeconomy and the circular economy, how you start building coherence. We've heard about the need to create business opportunity, make the case for investment, innovation, employment. We've heard the challenges about regulatory divergence, and the fact that many of these policies are developed in isolation, and of course the need for a fair and equitable transition that takes into account employment, livelihood, health. Room for flexibilities. I think all these are quite interesting. From a trade perspective, I still have the impression that the trade community is trying to catch up with all these different developments, and what does it mean? What does it imply? And it really raises a number of very fundamental questions from a trade perspective. In terms of what are the definitions we're using, what are the concepts we're using, how do we measure trade flow? How do we differentiate between refurbished, remanufactured goods, new goods? We don't have the HS codes that allow us to really map the trade flow. So there's a lot of kind of catching up that needs to happen. And of course, we're seeing that it's highly sector specific, and that you get completely different challenges and problems, whether you're looking at textiles or bioeconomy or plastics or critical minerals. So there's really a lot of work that needs to be done. I think the good news is that, and we've heard this morning, there's a huge amount of initiatives that are taking place, a lot of cooperation happening on all these points, be it at the regional level, at the global level, and we've heard a lot of examples, I think, in these discussions of good things and good practices that are taking place. So I think that's really encouraging, and I guess we just have to continue these discussions and these dialogues and this cooperation, and try to build on those good practices as we move. And finally, let me just again thank all our partners, UNCTAD, the Circular Innovation Lab, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, WEF. And all friends who have contributed to this initiative, and please join me again in thanking them on behalf of the organizer.
Christophe, can I just quickly abuse my welcoming authorities just to make one final remark, which was, Jack, thank you for mentioning again the report that we did on this guidance on best practices and approaches. It just strikes me in this room that, I mean, this is such an intensely complex issue, particularly if you take it down to different sectors. Like it's sort of, it's sort of the whole global economy in a way, and all of its sectors, and how do we transform those? I mean, we could also be having the same discussion around climate goals or nature goals. And of course, circular economy embeds many of those goals. But I guess the challenge, I mean, at least for TESS as an organization, is how do we then navigate what the community of experts who know about some of the trade and the circular economy next, what can we do together as a next step in this space? So I was just encouraged when you mentioned, that we do at least have this brilliant group of experts, including those here today, but some others as well, have come up with sort of these 10 considerations. So it would strike me, just as we're here, it would be useful to have a follow-on step of that conversation that really sort of maps out for each of those 10. Maybe there's lots going on one issue area and say, okay, those guys are taking care of it. Or maybe there's a slice of that that's about the trade interface, as sort of Ho is alluding to, where we might be able to find a particular sort of enabling tool or something that could be done within the trade policy community. But it would strike me we sort of need to map each of them and just sort of work out. Maybe there's just a huge amount of work already going on one area, and one just has to sit back and cheer for that. And maybe there's some other areas where we're just not quite there or talking yet to the right people or connecting the dots between the right communities. So that would just be an appeal. Maybe that's a useful next step, because it seems like you have all I wasn't directly involved in writing of this report. I was cheering, but it seems to me we have a community of people who can plot out at least a sort of a map of next steps, and different organizations here will be able to work on that in different ways going forward with different expertise and networks and so on. But just to say we should keep some of this collective energy, I think, alive on this issue, and to thank you, Arpit, as well. And my apologies for storming in at the end. I was inspired, so I wanted to share that as some parting thoughts. And thank you, Christophe, as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.